The front door was unlocked. That's the first thing the FBI agent noticed when they stepped onto the property just after sunrise. A quiet suburban home, fresh-cut grass, wind chimes moving softly in the morning breeze. The kind of house neighbors describe with one sentence, "Nothing bad could ever happen there." But less than 3 hours later, agents would walk down a narrow staircase into a basement that smelled like bleach and wet concrete and uncover something so disturbing that even veteran investigators stopped talking. And the strangest part? The man who lived there had spent years pretending to be the perfect neighbor. Friendly, helpful, quiet. The kind of guy who waved every morning. The kind of guy nobody suspected. Until the basement door opened. It started in a neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. One of those peaceful suburbs where kids rode bikes after dark and nobody bothered locking their doors. People there knew each other by first name. Backyard cookouts happened every summer. Christmas lights stayed up too long because nobody cared enough to complain. And right in the middle of that neighborhood lived 2-year-old Daniel Mercer. If you asked anyone on the block about him, they all said the same thing. He was normal. Daniel lived alone in a 2-story blue house at the end of a cul-de-sac. He worked remotely in IT support for a regional healthcare company. Every morning around 7:15, neighbors saw him outside with a coffee mug watering plants on his porch. Every Tuesday, he took his trash cans down before anyone else. During winter storms, he shoveled elderly neighbors' driveways without being asked. People trusted him. Parents trusted him around their kids. That detail would later haunt the entire neighborhood. Because for nearly 6 years, Daniel Mercer built the image of a harmless man so carefully, nobody noticed what was happening underneath them. Literally. The first signs appeared months before the FBI ever got involved, but at the time, nobody connected the dots. A woman named Claire Donnelly lived across the street. She later told reporters she noticed strange noises coming from Daniel's backyard late at night. Not loud screams or anything dramatic, just metallic sounds. Dragging noises, sometimes power tools after midnight. But Daniel always had an explanation. Home renovations, storage repairs, DIY projects. And honestly, nobody questioned it because Daniel seemed like the least threatening person imaginable. He wore glasses, volunteered at animal shelters, brought cookies to neighborhood events. People trusted appearances. That was the problem. Then came the first disappearance. Her name was Kayla Ruiz, 26 years old, bartender. Recently moved to Columbus from Arizona. According to friends, Kayla was trying to restart her life after a difficult breakup. She rented an apartment just 15 minutes from Daniel's neighborhood. On a Friday night in September, Kayla finished her shift around 1:20 a.m. Security footage showed her leaving the bar alone. She texted her roommate at 1:43, "Almost home." She never arrived. At first, police treated it like a routine missing persons case. Adults disappear all the time in America. Some leave voluntarily. Some return after a few days. Detectives checked hospitals, interviewed friends, tracked her phone records. Nothing. Then another woman disappeared 3 months later. Megan Holt. Different age, different lifestyle, different side of town. But one thing matched. She vanished less than 5 miles from Daniel Mercer's house. Still, nobody noticed the connection. The city kept moving. News stations covered the stories for a few days before switching to politics and celebrity scandals. Social media posts faded. Flyers disappeared from telephone poles. And Daniel Mercer kept smiling at neighbors every morning. Then came the dog walker. Her name was Evelyn Parker. And unlike everyone else, she noticed details. Every evening around 8 p.m., Evelyn walked dogs through the neighborhood for extra money. She passed Daniel's house constantly. One night, she noticed his basement lights glowing through a small ground-level window. What bothered her wasn't the light. It was the movement. She described it later as someone pacing, back and forth, for hours. At first, she ignored it. But over time, she noticed something else. Daniel's basement windows were covered from the inside with thick black plastic. That wasn't normal. A few nights later, while walking past the house, one of the dogs suddenly stopped near the basement window and started growling aggressively. Refused to move, tail stiff, ears back. Animals sense things humans miss. Evelyn later admitted she felt uneasy after that. But uneasy wasn't enough to call police. So life continued until January 14th. That's when a package delivery driver made a 911 call that changed everything. The driver arrived at Daniel Mercer's house around 11:08 a.m. According to the report, Daniel answered the door acting nervous, sweating heavily despite freezing weather. The driver handed him the package and noticed something strange behind him. A woman's shoe, just one, covered in dirt. The driver remembered it because it looked out of place in Daniel's spotless house. Then he heard something else. A banging sound, very faint, coming from below the floor. The driver later said Daniel immediately shut the door after that noise happened. Now, normally, that might not mean anything. But the driver had recently seen news coverage about the missing women. Something about the situation felt wrong enough that he sat in his truck for 5 minutes debating whether to call police. Eventually, he did. At first, local officers treated it cautiously. They visited Daniel's house that afternoon for a welfare check. Daniel invited them inside calmly, smiled, offered coffee. The officers noticed nothing alarming. No signs of violence, no screaming, no visible evidence. And legally, without probable cause, there wasn't much they could do. But one officer remembered something interesting. Daniel had previously worked as a maintenance contractor for several apartment complexes around Columbus, including the building where Kayla Ruiz once lived. That single detail reopened everything. Detectives started digging deeper into Daniel's background. Phone records, work history, GPS data, financial transactions, and slowly, the image of the perfect neighbor began cracking apart. They discovered Daniel had purchased industrial-grade cleaning chemicals multiple times over the past 2 years. He'd also ordered soundproofing materials online, large quantities. Then investigators uncovered something even stranger. Daniel's internet searches. Searches about underground rooms, ventilation systems, how long concrete takes to fully cure, and one search that reportedly made investigators stop cold. How to keep screams from traveling through basement walls. Suddenly, the case changed completely. Within 48 hours, the FBI joined the investigation. Neighbors watched in disbelief as unmarked vehicles filled the quiet cul-de-sac. Agents knocked on doors asking questions nobody ever imagined hearing in their neighborhood. Did anyone notice unusual smells? Did anyone hear noises? Did Daniel ever have visitors late at night? People started replaying years of memories in their heads. The waving, the smiles, the cookies. Every interaction suddenly felt sinister. Then investigators discovered recent thermal imaging from utility records showed unusually high heat signatures underneath Daniel's property. Not in the house. Unter it. That's when they got the warrant. At 6:12 a.m. on a freezing Thursday morning, FBI agents arrived at Daniel Mercer's home. But Daniel was gone. His car sat in the driveway. Coffee still warm in the kitchen. Television running upstairs. Yet the house was empty, almost like he knew they were coming. Agents searched room by room. Everything looked disturbingly organized. Floors spotless. Furniture perfectly arranged. Family photos on shelves, even though Daniel barely spoke to relatives anymore. Then one investigator noticed scratches on the basement floor. Not random scratches. Repeated marks, like something heavy had been dragged across concrete over and over again. The basement itself looked unfinished. Storage boxes, old tools, shelving units. Nothing unusual, until agents moved one of the shelves. Behind it was a second door. Steel. Locked. From the outside. And according to reports, that's the moment the entire atmosphere inside the house changed. Because from behind that door, they heard movement. Very soft, but unmistakable. One FBI agent later described the silence afterward as the kind that changes your life forever. Agents forced the door open, and what they found inside would shock the entire country. The hidden room was small, roughly 8 feet wide. Concrete walls, no windows, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And in the corner, curled beneath a blanket, was a young woman barely able to speak. Alive, emaciated, terrified. For several seconds, nobody moved. The woman reportedly flinched every time agents stepped closer, like she expected punishment for making noise. She had been missing for nearly 11 days. Her name was Rebecca Lynn Carter, 22 years old, college student, and according to investigators, she kept repeating one sentence over and over after agents rescued her. He said nobody would ever find me. But that wasn't the worst part, because Rebecca told investigators she wasn't the first person kept in that basement. And suddenly, the investigation turned into something far darker than anyone imagined. Part 2 gets worse, because what Rebecca revealed about Daniel Mercer's secret life beneath that house would expose a nightmare hidden in plain sight for years. If you want Part 2, hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you ever suspect someone like Daniel Mercer living in your neighborhood? Rebecca Carter could barely stand when agents carried her out of that basement. Neighbors watched from behind police tape in total silence. Some were crying. Some looked physically sick. Parents held their children close while FBI agents rushed in and out of the house carrying evidence boxes. And standing across the street, staring directly at the basement window, was Claire Donnelly, the same neighbor who heard strange noises late at night for years. She later said one-sentence reporters never forgot. "We all saw him every day, and we still had no idea." By the time Rebecca reached the hospital, investigators already realized this case was much bigger than a kidnapping. Because inside that hidden room, agents discovered signs that someone had been living there long before Rebecca arrived. Multiple sets of restraints, women's clothing in different sizes, scratches covering the concrete walls, and tally marks. Hundreds of them, carefully carved into the wall beside a rusted pipe. At first, investigators thought the marks represented days, but they were wrong. Rebecca explained what they actually meant during her first interview with detectives. Each mark represented a person Daniel brought into the basement. The room went silent when she said that. Detectives immediately asked the question. Everyone feared. "How many?" Rebecca looked down at her hands before answering. "I think 11? 11. Nobody in that room spoke for several seconds. According to Rebecca, Daniel never acted violent in public. In fact, that was part of what made him terrifying. He knew how to appear safe, friendly, calm. She said he studied people constantly, learned what made them trust him. Rebecca first met Daniel at a grocery store. He helped her load bottled water into her car during a snowstorm. They talked for maybe 3 minutes. That was it. She remembered him being polite, soft-spoken, almost forgettable. 3 days later, he approached her again outside a pharmacy. This time, he remembered her name. That detail made her trust him instantly. Because normal people don't expect predators to look ordinary. Daniel offered to help jumpstart her car after she claimed the battery died in a parking garage. Rebecca accepted. That decision changed her life. Investigators believe Daniel drugged her within minutes. When she woke up, she was in the basement. No windows, no sense of time, no idea where she was. Rebecca later described Daniel's behavior in ways that deeply disturbed investigators. He wasn't chaotic or unpredictable. He operated with routines, rules, schedules, like someone running an experiment. Every morning, he entered the room at exactly 7 a.m. carrying food and water. Every evening, he played loud music upstairs whenever neighbors were outside. And sometimes, he talked. Not angrily, not violently. That's what made it worse. Rebecca said Daniel spoke like a man trying to justify himself. He told her the world was cruel, that people were fake, that he was saving women who didn't appreciate their own lives. Classic manipulation. But then Rebecca revealed something investigators didn't expect. Daniel recorded everything. The FBI searched the house again with forensic teams. Hidden inside a locked cabinet upstairs, agents found dozens of hard drives carefully labeled by year. What they contained shocked even veteran investigators. Thousands of hours of recordings, secret cameras, audiophiles, detailed journals documenting women Daniel encountered over nearly 7 years. He tracked routines, favorite coffee shops, gym schedules, work shifts, social media habits. Investigators described it as obsessive surveillance. Like Daniel spent years building profiles on complete strangers before deciding who to target. But the biggest discovery came from the journals, because many names inside them belonged to women who were never officially reported missing. Some had simply vanished from communities where police assumed they left voluntarily. Others were runaways. Some had unstable family situations. And predators know exactly which victims receive less attention. The deeper investigators looked, the darker the case became. Forensic teams tore apart Daniel's basement, inch by inch. Beneath the concrete floor, they discovered signs of recent construction. Layers of cement poured at different times over several years. That discovery brought in cadaver dogs. And according to leaked reports, the dogs reacted almost immediately. Neighbors described hearing one woman scream after realizing what investigators might uncover beneath their quiet suburban street. Over the next 2 days, FBI agents dug underneath the basement floor while news helicopters circled overhead nonstop. National media exploded with coverage. The perfect neighbor case dominated headlines across America. Former classmates came forward describing Daniel as shy but intelligent. Coworkers said he barely spoke during meetings. Some neighbors defended him publicly at first because they simply couldn't process the allegations. That happens more often than people realize. Sometimes the human brain rejects horrifying information when it conflicts with years of normal memories. But then, investigators released another detail. DNA evidence connected Daniel Mercer directly to missing bartender Kayla Ruiz, the same woman who vanished after texting "almost home." Suddenly, public opinion changed overnight. People started asking a terrifying question. How many times had Daniel walked through the neighborhood smiling at people after doing unimaginable things beneath his own house? Then came the discovery investigators had feared. Under 6 inches of concrete, forensic teams uncovered human remains. The atmosphere outside the house changed instantly. Even reporters stopped talking for a moment when agents carried evidence markers into the basement. Authorities never released every detail publicly, but according to investigators, multiple victims were eventually identified through DNA analysis. Some families finally got answers after years of uncertainty. Others got nightmares confirmed. Rebecca's testimony became the center of the case. She explained how Daniel controlled victims psychologically more than physically. He constantly convinced them nobody was searching for them. Nobody cared. Nobody would believe them if they escaped. That level of manipulation destroys people slowly. And Daniel understood it perfectly. But investigators still faced one major problem. Daniel Mercer had disappeared. No bank activity, no phone signals, no confirmed sightings. It was like he vanished into thin air, hours before the FBI raid. And that terrified authorities, because if Daniel escaped successfully, nobody knew whether he would stop. A nationwide manhunt began immediately. Airports received alerts. Border agencies circulated his photo. True crime communities online analyzed every detail obsessively. Then a gas station clerk in West Virginia made a call. 3 days after the raid, security cameras captured a man resembling Daniel buying bottled water and pain medication around 2:14 a.m. He paid cash, wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But investigators noticed something important. His right hand was injured. That mattered because agents discovered blood inside the hidden basement room that didn't belong to Rebecca. The theory was chilling. Rebecca may have fought back harder than Daniel expected before the FBI arrived, which meant Daniel could be desperate. Injured. Cornered. The manhunt intensified. For nearly a week, America followed the case nonstop. Every major network covered updates. TikTok creators analyzed evidence. Podcasts released emergency episodes. And meanwhile, an entire Ohio neighborhood struggled to process reality. Parents learned their children once accepted candy from Daniel during Halloween. Couples remembered inviting him to backyard barbecues. One elderly neighbor broke down crying during an interview after revealing Daniel fixed her porch lights free of charge the month before the arrests. That's the disturbing truth about predators like this. They survive by appearing harmless, normal, trustworthy. Then came the final break in the case. A park ranger in rural Pennsylvania noticed an abandoned vehicle near a forest trail. The license plate matched a stolen car connected to Daniel Mercer. Authorities flooded the area within hours. Helicopters searched from above while tactical teams moved through dense woods below. And just before sunset, they found him. Daniel was hiding inside an abandoned hunting cabin nearly 12 miles from the nearest road. According to reports, he looked exhausted, thin, unshaven, but calm. Too calm. Investigators later revealed something deeply unsettling about the arrest. When officers entered the cabin and identified themselves, Daniel reportedly raised his hand slowly and said, "Took you long enough." No panic, no denial, almost like he expected the ending all along. Inside the cabin, agents discovered notebooks Daniel brought while fleeing. More writings, more victim lists, more surveillance details. One investigator later described the material as the diary of a man living two separate lives. Because that's exactly what Daniel Mercer did. Upstairs, he played the role of the perfect neighbor. Downstairs, investigators say he built a hidden world, fueled by control, obsession, and secrecy. During interrogation, Daniel refused to answer most questions, but he occasionally smiled while investigators discussed evidence. That detail disturbed people watching the trial months later, especially Rebecca. She eventually testified in court through tears, describing the moment she heard FBI agents outside the basement door. For days, she believed she would die there. Then suddenly she heard shouting upstairs, footsteps, metal crashing, and for the first time since her abduction, hope. Courtroom sketches from the trial spread everywhere online. Rebecca staring at Daniel, Daniel staring blankly ahead like nothing mattered. The prosecution called him a predator hidden behind suburban normalcy. And honestly, that phrase stuck with people because this story forced America to confront something uncomfortable. Monsters rarely look like monsters. Sometimes they mow lawns, wave politely, help carry groceries, and live quietly next door for years before anyone notices the darkness underneath. Daniel Mercer was eventually sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. Prosecutors stated the full scale of his crimes may never be completely known. Even now, investigators continue reviewing cold cases potentially connected to him across multiple states. As for the house, nobody wanted it. The property sat abandoned for nearly 2 years. Neighbors said people drove by constantly at night just to stare at it. Some claimed lights flickered inside despite electricity being disconnected. Urban legends spread online. But the real horror didn't come from ghost stories. It came from reality. Because one of the most terrifying parts of this case is how ordinary everything looked from the outside. A quiet street, a friendly smile, a man everyone trusted. Until the FBI opened the basement, and suddenly, the entire neighborhood realized evil had been living beside them the whole time. If this story shocked you, leave a comment with the creepiest part of the case. And subscribe for more true crime stories that prove sometimes the scariest people are the ones nobody suspects.